Got it.
I will second the motion.
Any discussion? No discussion, all in favor, aye? Opposed? Motion carries. Business licenses. Could have been in your packet. Do you have any questions on those?
I make a motion that we approve the business licenses listed.
I'll second that.
Any question, any discussion? I think, see, we have a food truck.
Saw that too.
No, I don't think that I think what we did was we regulated where they can set up. Which provides a lot of leeway, since we also said private property. And with the consent of the owner, of course. And so other than that, I don't have any questions.
Truck's going to your place?
Had one there.
Oh, yeah, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, wood fire.
Right. I remember that, yeah.
Okay, no further discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Unfinished business. Building permits, fees. Todd, I believe you're up.
That is me. Tonight we have before you all our first draft at I guess putting together a spreadsheet for discussion, but with the intent of tonight is that I decided to break this into two different chunks. We've got planning review fees and then building review fees. Planning review fees are for things like annexations or for site plan approvals, and planning reviews that go along with the zoning code and other pieces. After you get through that process, then you go through a building permit process. So typically, as part of the planning review, you have not only the planner, but also usually the city engineer or the city's engineering consultant. And then you have other disciplines that are called in also to review applications if they have wetlands and habitat, and they are significant in staff. If it's beyond the planner, then it would go out to another consultant. But the what I've done here is I put together a permit fee comparison that that basically looks at only the planning review fees and only some of those. There are pieces of some of these planning review fees that are notably missing. And when I was talking to the chair earlier, he said, well, where's the permit fees for grading? You know, where do we have the fees for plumbing review? Those are all associated with the building permit reviews. So because that, I mean, it seems like building permit is a one thing and we should have included it here. It actually includes several things, and there's nuances to it as well about, because building permits, when you look at a strict valuation, it gets to a point where it's just, some amount per $1,000 of assessed valuation, and it kind of goes up at a linear fashion, whereas the other part of it is kind of a more general bell curve. So what a lot of jurisdictions have found is that once it reaches a certain point, there's no way you're going to ever spend that much time reviewing your permits. They either put a cap on it or they come up with something that happens after a certain level. So there's a lot of conversation to have about building permits. And then you don't necessarily want to charge your neighbors based on the value of their fence or of their deck or of their shed. Just because a lot of times, you might spend $1,000 on a permit to build a couple $1,000 worth of fence. So it just doesn't make any sense. So a lot of jurisdictions will process fences at a nominal fee and decks, and then charge full fare for everything else like single family houses. So that discussion, I was thinking we could have as a separate component. I did bring that with me tonight, so if we want to get into it, we can. But tonight I just wanted us to take a look at the fee comparison that I have for a few of these, then take any questions that you all have, and as a result of tonight's conversation, then I'll come back with the revised this part and then bring back the building permit, all those associated fees for discussion at the next meeting.
Okay.
So also on the agenda tonight, we've got a couple of other updates for Callis Meadows and annexation too. So that's why I was trying not to overburden us with more than about 2 hours worth of conversation. So
We appreciate that.
basically what I've done here is I haven't recommended any changes yet because you all haven't discussed it, and I have direction from council that they'd like to see new development pay their own way. But what that means exactly, I don't know, which is why we've set you all up to review it. So that's looking at these are some examples of what other jurisdictions have done. I've got what Toledo has in here for theirs, and then also Kelso, Kalama, Napavine, and Ridgefield. So that you can see, there are also some notes that I put in there for, there were some that didn't directly compare. So I've got those notes over there in the side column. And then down in the bottom, there are also some footnotes. The city of Kalama, for example, charges consultants fees as a pass-through on top of the base permit fee that they collect. It just so happens that because we're talking about annexation, Adam from Kalama is here. So if you have questions about their permit fee schedule, you could definitely address any of those or the way they're doing that. It's a similar model to what you're adopting now with consultants.
Right.
Only Kalama does not mark up the consultants fees as they come through, whereas you all have that in your code and you do that at 15%. So
Correct. Now, under this fee schedule here with annexation, I'm not clear on when would somebody actually make that payment. When they come and present their proposal to you?
these are due before they're due at the counter to initiate the process. So in any of these land use processes, the applicant fills out a form with their basic information, and then with that, there's a required set of documents or information that they have to provide. And they pay the fee, and that's what they do to initiate. Before they've done that, the city takes no action.
Okay, now I assume that gets the ball rolling. And let's take the annexation that we have before us as an example. You know, that triggered the constitution of an investigative team that you're the head of, that the developers are paying for to do the mitigation studies and the other things that are necessary for the planning commission and council to make a reasonable decision on whether to move forward or not. The next person who comes in, see, I don't see anywhere on here where it actually shows where the applicant is going to be paying for the consultant fees that are necessary to put this in place, rather than an application fee.
And in Kalama's code, it's a little bit more clear than it is right now in yours. In yours, it's kind of buried in the administrative section of your code where it says that the city has the right to recover all costs spent in review of development applications. So it's kind of a piece that's buried and it's not really clear. So as part of one of your recommendations, you could say we'd like to have a base fee plus clearly stated either as a footnote to our fee table or within our fee table itself, whatever you think is appropriate. It's not something in there clearly saying that they intend on charging consultants fees, or something that says the city uses consultants and we will charge that. Also in Ridgefield, it's the same. They also have that ability to hire, but they also have planning staff. So whether or not they hire is up to the applicant in the Ridgefield case.
Okay, so could you put some words to that?
Yes. Did you want to, you got something for me?
Yes, sir.
Well, I would say that I think that you have two places that you could place it, and you could put it in a fee resolution as a portion of the list of fees so that it's clear, as well as on the application. But you could also ask the city council to amend like the subdivision chapter of the municipal code to make it very clear that you're establishing the authority of the city staff to bill beyond the application fee.
Right, that was actually what I was asking for, yes.
And so it can either go.
Or it could go both
In
places.
the building chapter, it could go in the subdivision chapter. I think you could also put it in the critical areas in an environmental chapter.
Could we get wording for that? And we can recommend the council make that
Sure.
change.
Exactly the kind of stuff I was fishing for. It's perfect.
Okay,
Well, Don, I'd like to know, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, excluding miscellaneous zoning, plat and subdivisions, environmental review. Well, that's the secret review. I guess there's 3.
the other one's marijuana.
Yeah, we'll leave that
It's
out
its own
for
section.
now. Typically, someone wanting to build a house. Not in the subdivision, just somebody wanting to build a house in the city limits. They're not going to need every one of these items, are they?
Very few of them, actually.
The only thing they would need would be a building permit application. If you're gonna move more than. It's more than 50 cubic yards, which is like 10 dump trucks full of dirt, then you need a grading permit. If you're in a critical area or, you know, trying to build a home that has critical areas buffers, you may need a critical areas permit. But those are most commonly, you don't need any of those, you just need a building permit.
I think the ones we've come up against so far are boundary line adjustments. Which are down here under plats and subdivisions, but we've had that in individual lots as well.
Right, yeah.
And did we do a vacation on that street that the pilots had?
We did, we vacated that street. Yeah, we went through that process for pilots.
Okay, and the rest would be for short subdivisions and subdivisions. So from an individual homeowner standpoint, I believe that's going to be dealt with in the building permit section that we're going to go over.
So just this last week, I did have an owner of a lot here in town. 508 Fifth Street. And he's got kind of a triangle shaped lot. He applied for a building permit and I did the planning and zoning. So what happens now when we take in an application, the applicant comes in here, they pick up a land use consistency form from us, where Public Works signs off on it. I look at the zoning requirements for setbacks and critical areas and other and building coverage and a few other planning things. Public Works, you know, lists their conditions on the permit for here's how you're going to connect to water and sewer. And if there's any street frontage improvements or anything like that needed, they note it. I note anything that I find in there about, you know, about meeting setbacks or other things. And then we both sign off on it. And they take that form with their building permit application up to Lewis County. That's the way we do it now. And Lewis County collects all the fees and processes the permits. In this case, when they brought that one in, I noted that the floodplain elevation comes right through the middle of the property, so it's likely that the building location was going to trigger a floodplain permit. So that in that case, they would also be required to do a critical areas permit for that as well. But in the case of floodplain permits, the county has said they've historically processed those on behalf of the city. So we didn't charge them a critical areas permit fee since the county's doing the review. I just checked the box that said that it needs a floodplain permit. We forward that off to the county.
Okay, and they would need to get SEPA involved, is that true?
Not for a single family residence. Those are exempt. I mean, unless you were doing, it's not common.
Okay.
A monster house.
Yeah.
So floodplain would only, floodplain mitigation or notation would only happen under the building permit? Nothing, not the SEPA section?
Well,
not the-
so as the city begins to process their own permits, I think that would trigger a critical area review.
Right.
Because we have to process the floodplain permit.
That's what,
And so in this case, you would apply that fee to that as a floodplain permit.
right, okay.
So, in the current situation, I didn't see the city doing a parallel review for something the county's doing.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So are we happy with the amount of the application for annexation?
Well, I can tell you that administratively, processing an annexation and city staff time is going to be significantly more than $600, even if you have consultants doing all the work and all the heavy lifting. Just for an annexation, There are numerous meetings with council, numerous meetings, if council chooses to get planning commission input, there's planning commission time and staff time set up for that. So, you know, $600 isn't nearly enough. You've got at least 2 council meetings and possibly as many as 4. Maybe more than that if council decides to bring it back for multiple hearings if there's an issue.
Mhm.
But at least 2, if you do the 60% hearing, then that's 3. So you've got 3 council hearings that are required, and then in this case, council has said we'd like planning commission to provide input on that. So then you've got all this and the staff that it takes to support this.
Staff that supports.
So that should be 3 or 4 times. higher.
I would say at least 3, because you at least have to account for your council meetings, and you're talking about, you're talking about Rachel, and I'm talking about any of the other paid city staff that. As well as Public Works has to review it, and you've got to get input from your police chief. So if you're looking at, man hours and staffing and who touches those things, and the number of people in the city that are employees of the city that are paid out of city general fund revenues. That's, thousands of dollars. So I would think that, but what a lot of jurisdictions do is they don't do cost recovery. They try to keep the cost of some of these permits low. And annexations is one of them, because they don't want to discourage, they don't want to have such a high bar to annexation that they discourage annexations. Because generally having property come into the city is a good thing for a city because it increases your tax base. There's usually a reason it's annexing, which is development, providing additional services to your community or additional housing or something like that that's needed, especially in a GMA planning city.
Can I ask Adam what their thought in Kalama was on how they set theirs?
Sure, we recently raised ours in the fee resolution, so the prices that you're seeing there were established in the last couple of years, and part of that was just because is that true? Are we using your new one? I think so. The 15 I don't know. Yeah, because we were particularly some of the land use ones, because we were finding that though we were recovering time for engineering or professional services, whether that be environmental or geotech or land use planners, just the staff time involved, in everything that leads up to the application, because one of the sort of catch-22 pieces is that all of the customer service and small town orientation of trying to answer questions and be friendly basically is at the city's expense.
Yeah,
That's all sort of front load. Come in and talk to us. And until that application fee gets paid, we can't put them on the hook for professional services for consultants. And they oftentimes depending on the applicant's knowledge and experience, they'll often come in and want an education or a tutorial from the staff about how do I do this, how do I get through SEPA, how do I process engineering and do a boundary line adjustment or do a short plat. Some of the small town charm is to be able to be helpful and not to send them packing to go spend their money and figure it out on their own.
I can appreciate
At the
that.
same time, trying to recover some of those costs. The rest of the citizens in the community are not subsidizing some out of town developer who doesn't have the experience and the resources to go play ball in Olympia or some other large city, and so instead chooses a smaller community where they think they can sort of learn their business a little bit, so to speak.
Well, the council made it pretty clear that they want to make sure that whoever joins our community pays for the effort to do so.
Right.
And since we're almost 100% consulting staff, I would opt for the $1,500 because it's going to set in motion. But that again, then has to have that caveat that you understand that we're going to be hiring people and you're going to pay for those. Does that make sense to everybody?
Absolutely, and I'm wondering if, or do we need to look at these item by item and adjust them? Or can we copy paste Kalama's fees? Is that realistic?
I think so, and I think that if you were, I think Ridgefield's structure is maybe even more, a little richer. They're, I mean, Glenn's experienced some growth, but Ridgefield is one of the fastest growing cities in the state, and they have, they have, figured out a way and maybe a little bit more sophisticated, structure in terms of monetizing and trying to recover some of those costs. So
My concern with them is they have quite a bit more land than we do.
mhm.
And we're not gonna be dealing with that many people. Even in our urban reserve area, there's not that many landowners out there. And I think as long as we're in that position, until we get to the sophistication where we have our own staff, and I'm not sure that we're gonna see that. I think we're gonna probably end up with a planning clerk. Someone to greet the person in off the street and take them through the ropes and things like that. And to archive Berlin permits and the such things, and the utility clerk to take over when the utilities require that. I don't see the city staff growing so large that we're going to be a small city with its own staff. We're gonna be very consultant heavy.
It's especially in the coming future, in the near future.
Sure.
And that's really the context I think we're trying to find the sweet spot in, is what context we're in right now. And with the housing going in right now versus how we want it to be forever. Because I see Todd's point about keeping it low to not discourage growth.
And I'm frankly, Ridgefields scare me.
Yeah.
They're scary.
Richfield's proximity to Vancouver and Portland is pretty significant as well. Compared to that.
True.
And I think part of what you see as the difference here is that Kalama has about the same model as you do, is they outsource a lot of their reviews to consultants. They have a consulting engineer, they've got a consulting planner. Ridgefield actually has staff. Only in an elective case can an applicant choose to engage an outside consultant. If they want a permit to move faster than what they perceive city staff can do, then they can request that the city engage, or the city can offer, say, hey, if you want this through in 2 months, we can do that, but we have to hire outside consultants to do it. In other cases for engineering, the city will sub out those reviews, but they have their own building permit review staff. They have their own in-house planning staff, and they have their own in-house engineering staff. Whereas this, so Kalama does not. They've got public works director, they've got Adam, and they've got an office. Kind of what you described, Mr. Chair, is having somebody, a permit clerk, take things in and do all the administrative work of getting them all in and processed and logged and doing almost all the building permit work, but they also have a consultant that does their building plan review and all of that. So the Kalama model is more similar to what you have in the Ridgefield model, because Kalama has about the same staffing situation as what I believe you all are contemplating.
My point was that you're free to recommend whatever structure you like. And if it's appealing to you, then yeah, absolutely, you can cut and paste and install. And I think that I can say with confidence that that's what we did. I mean, we looked around at other cities to say, what is reasonable for SEPA, and then how much of our staff time is spent before it lands on Todd's desk. And so at intake, and then what's the appetite in the market? What are people willing to pay?
Okay.
That help to fuel the conversation there?
Well, it does.
But categorically, you could. I guess that's the short answer. You could pick any of these and say, use Ridgefield, use Kalama, use Napamine, whatever. I mean, you could categorically say that, but then, of course, the staff report to council is that we've got to come up with some justification for that. So we should have some justification as to why we did that, and how it worked. But I can bring that back. I mean, if you say that you want to categorically use Ridgefield or whatever, then as part of what I bring back next time, I'll bring back a little draft of the staff report.
Well, I'd still like to go through some more of these these a little bit, but I'm inclined to copy and paste Kalama's into ours.
So the other thing I should note is that just because of the way these are, jurisdictions are very different in what they permit based on local nuances. What we did was we started with Toledo's. So if there's something missing from the left column over here, that's a planning review that happens in Toledo. It's here, but Kelso may have 10 more planning reviews than they could review.
Right,
And likewise, I mean, I was just talking to the Kelso planning director, and he's going to now have a planning review on every building permit, and he's gonna charge a $60 fee for that. Just because the planner should touch it to look at setbacks for every building.
Sure.
Oh, yes.
Somebody either in the office or as something else, everybody should look at that to make sure that even in a residential subdivision, the building meets setbacks.
Right.
That they're not proposing something that's inconsistent with the zone that it's in.
Right.
yeah, I think that we actually, council adopted our recommendation that anything that took a new water sewer hookup went before planning commission before it actually went to council. Which is why we extended the days that we did.
Okay, we're doing that.
I think that was pre you.
To investigate that, because we've been sending things off for building permit review without.
Yeah.
That require new water and sewer connections, so
Might want to look at that.
I think I do. That is an unusual case, but not so for a small community.
The small community and trouble we had was prior to you, staff was approving and sending things out when staff had no expertise. And we were finding ourselves in pile situations. And we wanted to nip that in the bud. And therefore, we extended the amount of time necessary for submittal to approval by council. And
Well, that would explain why I've seen the blanks I've seen on the Toledo version of the planning form that we have to submit to Lewis County. Your version has commission words in there. I thought that must be a typo.
no,
So I apologize.
it's okay.
Make sure those get routed appropriately in the future.
Could I ask about cluster residential development and hillside development performance standards? Toledo has $600 for each of those, but the other 4 jurisdictions have not actually applicable. So what do we have that they don't, I guess?
That is the inverse of what I was just describing, because I've started over here with your fee schedule, the categories that are here are yours, not Kalama's, not Richfield's, not, So in those cases, none of those jurisdictions had a comparable fee.
Oh, okay.
There are some notes over here where we've made some interpretations. The administrative review in Kelso, for example, when we talk about preliminary review for modifications to existing development, which is what it says in your fee schedule. We've kind of thought that was similar to a site plan review in most jurisdictions or an administrative review in Kelso. So that's what this notes column over here tells you, is that we couldn't find exactly what you had, but we found something that we thought was similar. And that's where we noted it, so that way you can usually see that and make an informed choice about it. But for those, for cluster developments and hillside developments, those in Kalama, they have a review for critical areas which regulates steep slopes. But I don't think you have a cluster development separate application. They've got a small lot floating zone that they can apply. So they probably have a fee for that because it requires a site plan and a review, but you don't have a small lot floating zone, so that may be similar to a cluster development though, as far as cost per review.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask you, cluster development.
But it's no different than our short plat subdivision. So I mean, I don't know why we would even
So-
bother.
Clusters are usually when you have a critical area or some other amenity. So what you want to do is you want to allow the same density. So if you have a 5-acre piece and you've got a pond in one corner of it, and you can't develop the pond, then what you would do is use a cluster development standard. So you'd still be able to get the same density on the remainder of that piece. So you'd end up with a higher density development on a piece. And then you leave another piece untouched.
I don't know that we have an allowance for that unless it meets the minimum lot size standards though in a cluster,
That's
so.
true. You don't have cluster design standards in your code that I'm aware of, so the fact that you have a cluster development fee.
Kind of markable.
I don't know, because you don't have any standards that apply to that. I mean, the theory of a cluster development is that when you have a bigger piece of property that's somehow impacted, or maybe the developer decides to do something creative and do a community park on one piece of it, but they don't want to give up the densities.
But aren't we looking at situations that eventually they trigger SEPA anyway? So we'd have that review.
Well, you'd have a subdivision review, as you said, so you'd probably just review it under subdivision, they just have for variances under your current code.
But it would only be a SEPA if it was like a pond, not if the developer wanted to retain some bit of nature inside of it, right? Because it's like a,
Well, if you're doing either a short plat or subdivision, both of those generally trigger SEPA,
like, right,
so.
from the
Those
get-go.
underlying land uses would trigger SEPA. If they didn't, then a building permit
Right.
with a pond on it would likely trigger
Right.
environmental review, which may trigger SEPA.
So I'm just wondering if we could eliminate a few of these.
I think.
Things here.
Would you like me to go through and figure out which ones aren't supported in your code? and
Yeah.
Cross those out?
No, you just have it.
Yeah, in like cluster development, you don't have standards for that I have ever seen, so.
No,
But we could add it later, after 10 years from now, if we realize, oh, we need it.
then we could modify our fee
And
schedule.
then you can modify the fee
Oh,
schedule.
okay, good.
Yeah.
We're not chiseling anything in stone.
Well, it's in stone in that you're creating a fee schedule to be adopted and applied by the city, but. There's no limitation on how often you can change your fee schedule. If we get into this 2 months and it's like, oh, that doesn't work, then we can bring it back before you can make a recommendation to council can change it. again.
Just get a new stone.
But it's not retroactive.
Yeah, right.
It's not uncommon to ask council to approve a citywide fee resolution with the budget every year. And with that, you could choose to change any of the building or planning.
Yeah, I would like to see that happen and we'll work towards,
Yes.
doesn't,
The fee schedule is part of the budgeting process.
well, we're
It
gonna,
just never changes.
we're gonna change it.
With the exception of parking.
We're gonna address the issue of possible changes before the budget comes up this year.
So we can make that as part of the recommendation that yearly, as they consider their budget, that they forward this to planning commission. You know,
That's
be
good.
Part of your yearly workload.
Right.
That this comes up once a year in the months before they start their budget, so that way you can look at the fees and then make recommendations.
Exactly. Okay, that's great. The items under inspection fees on page 2 of mine. I assume that we're going to follow the format that we had discussed before. As long as we're doing an interlocal with either Winlock or Napavine until we get to the point where we actually hire somebody to be an inspector full-time in the city. That their building permit would contain the necessary inspections.
So-
In this particular case, in a residential, I believe it's 9.
This I actually did pull forward. You don't have these fees in your fee schedule now,
Right,
but they are unusual and ordinary, and they are an important piece of. So what these are is this is for the subdivision infrastructure. This isn't for the residential building permits that go in, but when the developer goes in, they go in for a preliminary plat approval, which you're about to hear for Cowlitz Meadows.
right.
And then their engineer goes to work and creates engineering construction documents. And then those usually go through an engineering plan review. And then after those are reviewed and approved, somebody needs to go out and make sure that that stuff gets put in the ground the way it was on the plan, or if it's not, why is that? And that's the subdivision inspection fees. They also go out and they'll, they spot check the
Okay.
roads to make sure the roads and the curves and the gutters all match the plans, and all of the public elements that are then gonna get dedicated back to the city.
Of course.
You have a vested interest in making sure that those are constructed. to
Oh, yeah.
spec.
Oh, yeah.
So those I actually did pull forward from other jurisdictions because they're important ones and they weren't in yours. And that is a way for you to recover some of the cost recovery that you do off of Gray and Osborne, although since you sub that out to them.
No.
We don't need to have a big fee in there, we could just have an administrative fee to take in those applications and then but we should note in the fee schedule.
Does Gray and Osborne have the staff facility to do inspections for streets?
So generally, they work in conjunction with your public works director, so the authority generally lies with.
Public Works guy.
Director. The professional expertise then comes from either.
Out there for shooting forms and shooting elevations and
Exactly.
monument grades and things like that.
A lot of times you'll get the public works director will get a report and recommendations, and then there's a place for the director to then sign off on the civil drawings.
Right.
As an approval.
Okay,
I'm thinking about that process correctly, so there is quite a bit of time involved for the public works director, because they're the ones that are essentially coordinating that process with the planning part.
does our Public Works Director know that yet?
The city of Toledo, as far as I know, hasn't done a subdivision in 45 years, so nobody's done that. You're about to do one, and then after that, I would imagine you're probably gonna do 5 or 6 others.
I can imagine we will too.
So I would guess that no one knows that, because I don't think your public works director was alive 45 years ago. I think he's younger than me. So he probably, he doesn't, I mean, nobody's been through that process here in the city, so unless he comes from another jurisdiction with experience.
right,
No way for anyone to know.
okay, we'll have to have that conversation with him. And now, of course, he would also be. My experience of running developments is that the soils engineer, although he works for the developer, is actually beholden to the city for compaction results and gradation results and things like that. And he actually ends up writing a report that helps you get your subdivision finalized and that everything was done according to Hoyle. So I assume that interaction would be done with the Public Works Director as well, correct?
So there are some jurisdictions that require as-built drawings.
Well, we would probably
So
do that.
post-construction, you can require an applicant to submit a set of drawings with any of the changes or corrections that were noted in the field. And then the designing engineer will usually stamp those as being as being designed to the standard according to code. So if you require as-built drawings, that should be another process in here that I did not bring forward.
Well, we should require as-built drawings because in the history of this city is so old that you never know what you're going to find when you start digging. And when you start moving things, you want to know 20 years from now where that is. And you're not going to know if you don't have as-built. And
I think you all call those record drawings, right?
So we call them as-built. We have the same experience. We have sewer maps from 1954 that are on paper that are sort of slowly deteriorating, that are stored in a map room in the back of the public works shop. And when there's an issue in the middle of the night, yeah, you go out and look at the site and then drive back to the shop and look at that. And we have a situation where we require as-builts now because we used to just accept red lines or the initially approved construction drawings. And you're absolutely right. So sometimes those valves and what actually gets constructed and put in the ground because of rocks or other things are not reflected on the plans when they're 50 years old and everybody is either retired or dead that was there at the time. Yeah, it can be a challenge at 2 a.m. So I think you're absolutely correct that before final plat, to require as a condition of final plat approval often as-built drawings.
yes,
And you would have to do that because your code doesn't require that. So when we talk about approval of Cowlitz Meadows, somebody's gonna have to remind me that you all want as-built drawings. You'll have to condition them specifically on,
okay.
because it doesn't exist in your code today.
Was that something we recommend to council to put into the?
Yeah, and I think if you're going to do that too, you could have a fee in here so that way the public works director has some man hours to review them. And you have a placeholder that if Mike Johnson's gonna look at it, then they know they're being billed on a cost recovery basis.
Right.
We would add that to the fee schedule and you'd make a recommendation to council that they add as-built requirements. And maybe some specificity on the final plat process with inspection and all that stuff. Right now, it's engineering light. I don't know what your engineering standards would say. I don't think you have that in there, but if it's not in your code, if it's not codified, it's not necessarily a rule.
Right.
So you require the processes in your code, and then you define them in your engineering standards. So we could make a recommendation with this to council that they remand the planning commission a directive to come up with code for final plat processes and as-built and all those things. Then you all can get to work through that with me and make a recommendation on that back.
I think that would be appropriate.
So do I.
Do you anticipate the city opening up a marijuana dispensary anytime soon?
We've been talking about it for a long time, but I've never.
Well, I keep looking at,
Smelled it.
the plat or the city map. And there's virtually no place for them to be, that they're not within the designated distance of a school, except.
Hardware store.
I don't think Tanya's planning to give that up anytime. Is it?
And you have to get through a whole lot of others. It's goal is to not let it happen.
Be a full city council meeting.
But, so I think that the reason that you have so much on marijuana regulation in your code is because a number of years ago, the state mandated that all jurisdictions allow them in at least some zone.
Oh, then our growth management.
Yeah, it was part of the process that came down 7 or 8 years ago. I mean, you guys went through it too.
Yeah, so it also provides, if you prohibit it, you're not eligible to receive the state shared revenue.
Right.
Collected through Liquor and Cannabis Board.
Mhm.
If you do allow for it, but doesn't matter how prohibitively difficult you make it, you're at least eligible to collect the state shared revenue, so that might be.
So we just leave that, we just leave that alone. then.
Yes.
Okay,
I think so, and you know, the likelihood of it happening or not is what it is. But if you don't have it somewhere in your code where you've clearly shown that it's allowed and you've even got fees for it. Honestly,
Okay.
it's like 60% of your code is about marijuana regulations. I don't know, you know, it's bigger than your subdivision section, it's bigger than anything else, but we have a lot of regulations on marijuana
right.
dispensaries.
50 years of tax revenue.
Probably so, yeah.
Adam, does Kalama have a dispensary?
It does not, we chose to do a rather challenging zoning area. We picked a spot that we've had a couple of people try. They haven't been able to make it through the land use because there's no utility or access or roads or anything else to that large chunk of rock.
Well, I was just curious how much tax revenue that actually generated for a city.
I can look it up. I'm probably not fast enough to do it.
$700 for us
But
a year.
Oh, okay, okay.
I brought our budget, so I can tell you from last year if you give me them.
Sure.
But don't wait on me.
Eric said $700. I think he just made it.
So
No,
correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, I think we've determined that we are going to go ahead and cut and paste Kalama's with some modifications that we've discussed. And
keeping our marijuana.
Keeping your marijuana.
Yeah.
I think,
And then, so maybe as I bring back the next draft of this, a little bit more direction too on the elements that. You want to see everything that's in Kalama's that's not in yours, and make a by one decision as to whether or not you should have a fee for that, even though you may not have a process. I mean, you've kind of given me direction to go through these and figure out which ones you don't have code for and delete them. Do you want to try to look at what, because there are a few other ones.
well, it's hard without the building permit fees here to understand what goes in what particular section, because I'm thinking about, you know, permits for decks or permits for re-roofing. You know, you want,
in the building.
really what you want is you want them to come in, let you know they're doing it, that they're gonna do it with a licensed contractor and what is that, $100, you know, or $50 that you charge them and they go about and do it. We're not trying to penalize our citizens for improving their homes.
Right.
So, you know, I don't think we're trying to make any money off that. In fact, I'm sure we're not going to. But you know, it's the cost of doing service to your community. And
So I do have with us tonight, I brought, but I have already developed that section where we've compared some of the building conditions. So if you'd like to get into a little bit of that now, we're a little bit ahead of where I expected we were because we took that major leap forward. So if you'd like to look at these, but none of you have had a chance to review them yet, but we could pop them up here on the screen and maybe if you're gonna give some direction on that. If you're gonna give similar direction on that one, then I can just bring it all back next time and then I wouldn't have to bring this back at all. It's. I think some of the nuances I wanted to get into were some of them that I discussed already, and that's that. With building permit fees, there's a scale. Let me see what we have. Scroll into that.
$4,874 last year in marijuana excess tax is the revenue generated.
Oh, okay,
Still bigger than.
4,800,
Yeah,
but your population is,
3,065,
3,065,
I think.
okay,
Those are some of them.
their number's probably.
not running to the bank with that, huh?
Now, although it has surprised me, I was, I've been surprised by, how much it was originally reading the initiative 502 legislation. The initiative draft, I thought, oh my goodness, we're never gonna see all this money. And get almost $5,000.
So yours has already been updated to.
I'm sorry?
They have to refresh you.
Well, it's the half of a pedestrian traffic sign.
Or a few hours in staff time or something else that.
Yeah.
That offsets. another
Yeah.
cost. So apparently. Your city volunteer was awesome and updated the electronic version of this, so those of you looking at it. Electronically from your packet already have this in your packet,
Okay,
but it did just get put there at about 5:30 tonight, so I guess, you know, and that was me, I didn't send it until 5 today, because I was not expecting to talk about this, and then when I was talking to the chair, he suggested, well, you might want to include it. But here, we have building fees. I think this first section is got to be residential. Well, I just said building fees, but building permit fees, and then similar here in the columns, you have the same, you have Toledo, then you'll have Kelso, Kalama, Ridgefield, and Napamine, and then the other one is, these are all similar because they're all based on the state's model.
All right.
So everybody kind of adopts the state's model, it doesn't tweak it very much. And I know that there was some concern about the cost recovery idea that you're gonna subcontract that out, much like much like you do planning and other services, and there was some concern about making sure you had enough. So again, Adam's got great experience with working with an outside consultant to do building plan review and inspection. And I believe you guys use pretty close to what the state's model is, with little or no variation. So these are.
Oh, thank you.
Let's see, so this is what you have currently here in your code. Which is pretty close already to what the other jurisdictions, so I guess. With the exception of Napa, Vine, and Ridgefield, looks like have lower valuations in some.
Yeah.
Looks like you're all pretty much using the state building code fees with minor tweaks. So it looks like Napa and Ridgefield have lowered the cost of some of those fees as they go up. Can you scroll down just a little bit?
yeah, these numbers look comparable here.
So one of the nuances is when you're looking at some of the valuations, you get into a situation where it's 73.94 for the first million plus $5.20 for each additional $1,000. Well, when you're looking at millions of dollars, what starts to happen, and since you're adding 520 for each thousand, all of a sudden that becomes linear. Whereas if you look at these, they're not necessarily linear. There's a little bit of a curve, so that the lower valued homes and the lower valued commercial permits aren't overburdened with a higher percentage of their overall cost.
Go to commercial.
They have a lower burden in there, so there's not as much of a So it's a flatter into the first and then it goes up. But the problem is when it hits the $1 million, which is the top of the state scale, it continues to go up exponentially. So if you have an $80 million project, your building permit charge on that is huge.
So that's where we would probably want a regressive set of building permit fees would be in the commercial area rather than residential.
Right, well, but even, you know, if you're looking at $1 million home. You know, the idea that you have $1 million home in your community used to be something that nobody had ever heard of, but now. You know, there are $1 million homes being built in the community, you know, quite frequently. And as the.
What would that
construction
do to
costs
us?
Go up and. No, these are construction costs, not market values of
Right.
properties, so what you're looking at is.
It's a $2 million house.
Right, is $1 million house on $1 million lot, or $1 million house on a $500,000.
I'm talking about construction cost versus assessed value on the house after it's done, market value.
I see these costs generally don't include any of the fixed costs, so none of the land cost.
Right.
The other thing that I don't know that I have definitive proof on it, but what seems to happen is that as you're utilizing pieces that are adopted by the state, especially in high value appreciation projects, like we recently had.
You had in the hill, right?
Yeah, well, you end up with a sort of a 2-year lag in the pricing, and then it takes your local bureaucratic process a little while, and because you may not do this every year, it's pretty easy to get to the point where you're behind about 4 years.
Additional.
And so,
You know, the thing that I guess I'm cautious about is you were here for the presentation from Joma, and they're gonna go anywhere from $400,000 to $1 million for. And I don't want to get too far behind on that.
right,
I've seen it.
and it may be, so we're experiencing a situation right now where the construction valuation based on the square footage model that we've adopted, where we look at, you know, okay, for a 1,400 square foot or a 1,700 square foot house, you know, here is the sort of adopted value that we have to base our permit on.
What are you using? $150, $175 a square
Yeah,
foot?
I don't even remember what it is, but I know that the valuation of the construction, wholesale construction cost is, you know, 170, 220,000, but I know that those homes are gonna hit the market and the retail price point is gonna be 450 to 500.
Right, so.
And I'm sort of saying, well, wait a minute, but why are we experiencing this big of a difference? Their markup isn't probably that big, but that's part of that lag.
Well,
in terms of
And it still pencils out for them.
But it also still pencils out for us.
It does, but you know, when you talk about fee structures for $1 million and up, you're really talking about a $2 million home, not a $1 million home. And I don't think $7,000 for a $2 million home is outrageous. And it's the part where now you're asking $47,000. You know. After but that's the first million, no. That's not too much.
But the idea that it takes twice as long to review a $2 million home as it does a $500,000 home or a $100,000 home is not accurate. I mean, it just doesn't take that much.
No.
Process.
Another 30 to 40%. I mean, the foundations themselves.
You will experience the prescriptive construction of, you know, somebody builds a nice little 2-story box in a rectangular shape and puts a gable end 4 and 12 roof on it. That doesn't take very long to review. It also doesn't cost very much to build, but at your price point, then people have a tendency to want more custom amenities, and now you've got engineered foundations, and you've got pieces that are far away from a prescriptive construction, which then takes longer to form hips and valleys, and everything else gets more complicated. So it takes longer to review. I will say that Todd's absolutely right, though, that as you have projects that become more and more expensive, the fees that you recover, so like the way that we're based with our plan review is that the plan reviewer gets a proportion, whatever our fee schedule says,
Mhm.
they get 70% of that. And so we know that we're making a margin. And as those designs get more and more complicated, yeah, it takes them a little bit more, but they're generally pretty happy so long as we've negotiated an appropriate proportion. We're pretty happy because we're getting some overhead covered. Then when it comes time to do the inspection, we pay their inspector by the hour for drive time and then for hourly rate to, and the more complicated the house, the longer the walkthrough is going to take.
Sure.
So,
Right.
you have in there the portion of the plan review.
Could you scroll that back down a little bit, or get rid of that?
Plan review,
thing.
those are usually, they usually,
Down or up?
the plan
Could come
review
down a little bit
based on
too.
60% of the building permit cost.
Down more?
No, up.
I'm
I
just
guess I
wondering
meant
what
up.
they're looking at is showing the map.
I wanted to get to the part where the building permit started.
So these are,
There, yeah.
so these are the permit fees. I think if we scroll down to the bottom of the table, the footnote here, it'll tell you that plan review fees are. Plan review fee is 65% of the permit fee, 65 to 70, 65, 65, 65. So most of the time, so that is your permit fee that you pay when you get issued your building permit.
Right.
The plan review fee is 65% of that, so you get both of those fees together when you do a building permit. So
Okay.
it's that plus 65%. Actual permit.
So the Kalama schedule doesn't look, I mean, how did we reach the one that we have on our table? For Toledo,
That's a state level.
is that the state level?
So is that what the county is charging the applicant?
That is current. Yes, that is. We brought across the counties and had that conversation today.
So the county has no problem with these fee schedules.
No, and most jurisdictions don't. The county has on-staff building inspectors and other,
Right.
you know, and they are all accountable to make sure, you know, one of the issues that we had in one of the jurisdictions that I do work in is because they had such a, I mean, they did have, you know, an $80 million project and they collected so many building permit and plan review fees that the problem that their director now has is he's gonna eventually sit down and show how he spent that money as part of his building department, and he's limited in where he can spend those funds. He can't just put them into the city budget and spend them elsewhere. So he's thinking, I'm gonna have to refund some of that money because I simply can't spend all of that money in a year.
Well, does anything prescribe us from reducing our rates? Once we see, our problem is, and I'm sure you're aware of it, that we have absolutely nothing in place now. From a building department standpoint, I mean, we need computers and software and archive materials and a clerk and you know, I think after Cowlitz Meadows, we would want to seriously look at getting a on-staff full-time inspector planner that could do plan review and inspections in-house. Before we hit the Jolma property. And do any of the big commercial work that's being planned out there, so.
But these fees do support in-house staff and out-of-house reviewing, and these fees even do support in-house.
Oh, I don't have a problem with
full
these
staff.
fees.
So those fees that you're seeing in your column now are what the county is currently using, and they employ full-time people to do plan reviews and inspections. They don't outsource any of that. The idea when you go into an outsource situation, it just means that, and our council's given me direction to go out and investigate both the RFQ process and at the last council meeting, I got firm direction from them that yes, we want you to go out and investigate it, or local agreements with Lewis County, Napavine and Winlock. Those are the three jurisdictions. And those interlocal agreements will be basically where we're borrowing their building officials. But at the same time, they also directed me to start looking into developing an RFQ for building services that get sent out to private parties.
RFQ.
Request for qualifications.
Yeah.
When you're, when the city hires somebody, they're not allowed to do so on a fee basis, because the theory is that you want qualified people, not cheap people. So the way that the state of Washington, in all of their wisdom, has worked this, is that you do a request for qualifications. And that a consultant then submits, here's my resume and here's my qualifications to do the work. And then you select the most qualified consultant. And only then are they allowed to share with you what their cost is. And then you can negotiate on fee. Once you've looked at that fee, then you can say, well, you're too expensive for us, we can't afford you. And then you're allowed to go to the next qualified bidder and then begin that negotiation process again. But the idea that when a municipality or when a public entity selects consultants, they shouldn't be doing that based on lowball fees. There are a lot of exceptions to that rule. It's not an absolute, but generally that's the way it works, and that's why they're called requests for qualifications. Alternately, you do have small works, then you can do requests for proposals because you've already established what's the qualified individuals that are doing it. So
Sort of like the people diving into the tanks at the sewer treatment plant.
I'd rather not.
There's only two. Okay, so should we move forward with this?
So,
I mean, Kalama's not that different than ours.
no, and like I said, I think what we found was that almost everybody uses the state's. Did you guys adopt any variances to the state, or did you just,
In terms of our building code, we do have a couple of things. I think we have a lower SEPA threshold for fill soil. And then we've got a couple of other bits in that chapter that are specific. Usually have some sort of history to them, but for the most part, no, it's the state's exemptions of the ICC code updates when they come out. Well, with a little bit of lag behind. I want to say 21 is up for adoption. ICC version 2021 is up for adoption in July, August.
So then you had also had questions about things like grading permit fees. I think you included up above this, I think there were the special permit fees. No, we're right in marijuana, maybe it's still, or maybe this didn't get added in. I was specific to building permit fees. There you go. Other, there they are, other inspections and fees. So you see things in here like pole buildings, irrigation, use of outside consultants. This is where you have actual costs in your fee table. But what I don't see in here is fences. Fences and decks and sheds. A lot of times.
And the other things that I was talking about before is the things like placement of a modular home or a tiny home on a lot.
A pre-constructed. See, those have a valuation, and those oftentimes just you pay full fare. But if that wants to be different here, if you want to say that placement of that requires.
No, I think you're right on top of it.
But those can have, it's things like that, the nuances that we should discuss here. If you're saying that there are a lot of pre-manufactured homes that are already certified when they come in and get delivered, and all that's required really is a utility inspection. Those shouldn't be required to be valued the same as a building permit. Although in many jurisdictions, you're not allowed to consider them different than stick-built homes for the purposes of zoning and land use. So sort of a justification for requiring them to go through the same permit cost is that they're allowed in the same situations as others. But usually the people who choose that option choose that option because it's a more economical one and that's one we can afford. So affording them an option to have a lower permit fee is something that you could do. If it's, and that may help you in the GMA policies for, if you've got land zoned for that, you could say, well, yes, but we allow, modular homes or manufactured homes.
To the
to be
building,
placed in all of our
to the
zones.
first line.
And we do that at a discounted fee, well, that goes to the new GMA policy that you have to have lower income housing to the community. So those are more important.
And that may be categorized as a placement permit because you don't have the actual structure inspection because the Department of Labor and Industries
Right,
inspects them as they're constructed. So generally, once it's brought in on site, there's a foundation and then a tie down inspection. All the decks and access points to make sure that they're code compliant, all your railing and gapping is acceptable, as part of the placement permit, but. Yeah, it's totally justified to have a separate category, to deal with the manufactured homes.
We don't have that right now.
So I didn't see that in your code now, so but I can bring back I can bring back that with some recommendations next time too, if you'd like to consider that, or you could just say that they're.
yeah, because the problem I have is if we adopt it as a building permit per se, let's say. And the guy brings in $100,000, double wide, and then he sets it on a foundation, we're picking up $844. And I can assure you by the time, the foundation inspection's done, the railings, the occupancy permit, getting a driveway poured correctly and meeting our curbs and gutters. It's a lot of staff time.
It's $844 for the permit fee, it's 65% of that for the plan review fee. So you get $844 plus 654, $540. So you get that total. And is that total amount enough to review the placement of it? Are you likely to come up with more than $1,500 placement permit fee, or does that sound?
No, I can't. Well, I can't. I think council would have to approve that, but I mean, from our standpoint,
So is there a reason to have a separate fee for placement if the building plan review and permit fee works out to about the same as what you think would be adequate for that?
Well, like you pointed out, Todd, earlier, if it's a modular home, it's new, it's built to specifications.
Yeah,
And there isn't a need for the same level of inspection and all that as there would be on a stick-built house.
just another way to think about it. You can think about it from all sides. And that's why I presented that as an option. I mean, it's not the same as a stick-built house. You're not doing the same level of plan review. But you may be doing more inspections of railings and gappings and everything in the field for the placement of it. Whereas you wouldn't have to do that. You just go through your normal round of building inspections. I guess those would all include that too, some of the railing. So.
I'm trying to think how many hours an inspector would spend out there time on a double wide 24 foot. With concrete foundations and decking and railing and driveways and curb cuts. He's probably gonna be out there 5 or 6 times anyway. So, I mean, you almost cover him in his inspection fee portion of that.
So maybe it's just 65% of the fee is what you collect. Maybe you don't ever collect the plan review fee, you just collect the permit fee. Or the other way around, you just collect the plan review fee and not the permit fee. You collect 65% of the permit fee for your placement fees. And that way you're only getting the inspection portion of the building permit fee, you're not getting the other, but it's still based on valuation.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I like that, but what I'm wondering is if we don't have a separate entry for mobile homes and modular homes, would there be someone in this permitting process that would have the latitude or the discretion to waive part of the fee? They would come in and say, I'd like to put this double wide in, it's brand new. Can I get part of the fee waived?
On a case by case basis.
would there be a way to build that latitude in, I guess?
I could imagine the city attorney would say, we do not want to set precedent, so we're gonna not do that, so
Well,
I don't see that happening.
I don't think to be able to build it into the fee schedule, but council has the authority to waive the fees. So if somebody were, I mean, just like what we heard this week with council, somebody had a water bill that they had a main break and they came in and asked for relief on their water bill and council granted some relief on their water bill. So just along that same vein, I think somebody could come into council and say, look, you guys are charging me $8,000 to place my manufactured home here, and that seems pretty steep, given the fact that I've already, it's a brand new unit, and I didn't buy it from Joe down the street. This isn't a 70s model, this is a brand new model, so I don't think it's already been certified by the state as meeting all your building codes, so.
The thing I'm having difficult with, Todd, on that though, is I look at the fee schedule here for the building permits. And what, if you take a look at what the cost is now for a modular home, I mean. Rarely over $250,000, and I've never seen one that expensive.
That's what they're doing for the new triple wides.
Maybe, but at that, you're still only talking about $1,300. So.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like,
I
well, you have to remember, it's $1,300 plus 65%, because you can't get. Because if you're gonna go by the building code, you're gonna value it the same as you would a single family residence, and that means you have to do a plan review and permit fee. So those two elements would always apply.
So I guess my question is, do we treat all apples alike? And that's the question I have, is because if somebody comes in and wants to build a tiny house, he's gonna be part of our building process. Tiny home or not.
How about if I bring back, so I deleted them out of this table because they weren't in your table, but how about if I look at these other jurisdictions and see what they have for mobile home placement fees? And then I'll bring that back and you can consider at that point, whether or not that's better to go that route, or is it better just to leave it?
What are you doing?
I think we've got a separate structure for manufactured home placement.
Any recollection on how much it is?
Yeah, I'd have to, I think it's less expensive, but I'd have to go look.
Mr. Eric?
But I'm wondering if it would be nice to see a couple of examples. So here's what it would cost all in the place of double wide. Here's what it would cost to place a $250,000, and here's what it would cost to place a $600,000.
And what would cost for a tiny home too?
John?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, inject one thing, if you do a placement fee, make sure it's crystal clear that it's only for single family residents. City of Seattle found out when people come in with multi-unit prefab and all they had was a placement fee, and they built a 14-story apartment building in 2 days.
Wow.
With 3 cranes. So you gotta be real careful that you designate single family and multifamily if you're gonna do a placement fee, because it's the same exact component. It's been done by Labor and Industries.
Well, it makes you want to go back to the building permit process because of the valuation of the placement.
Based on those. The other thing is, don't weight everything toward new construction. A demographic of the city of Toledo that I've just done recently, of the 400, I think it was 40 homes that are here in the actual city, only 125 of them have sold in the last 25 years. Our demographic of the 85-year-old woman living in the house
They are.
that's been there for 40 years, you're gonna see in the next 5 years, maybe 6 years, somewhere out in there, a lot of remodels as families move in and buy these houses. So don't wait all of your time against new construction. You're gonna have a ton of people coming in and fixing these older homes up and adding on to them and turning them into what they need.
Yes,
Because functionally,
Another reason why we would behoove ourselves to prepare for
Yeah.
hiring a permanent in-house.
2/3 of this is functionally obsolete.
Inspector?
And so.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that all applies to remodels too, it's the same, it requires a building permit for a certain threshold as well.
Oh, okay.
Anything else on that?
I don't know if I got good clear direction on which way to go on building permit fees. You wanna just.
I think we wanted to copy Kalamas.
Copy Columbus in the planning and land use fees. For the building permit fees, they're pretty close. Do you wanna
Just copy theirs.
just copy theirs?
I'm not gonna write checks for 1359 and things like that.
So the, and then for fences and sheds, you want me to bring forward some examples on those?
I do.
I may not have pulled them forward. I thought I captured what you had now, but I might have missed some. Your fees are
Going up,
Go ahead.
scattered.
going up or down?
Down. Really?
What are you looking for?
Fences, decks, sheds, but I'll bring those forward. If you have them in your code, I'll bring those back, but I missed them if you do. But I'll bring those back in the jurisdictions.
They're not in there, no.
Is there anything else that you would like to see as far as examples or anything else I should bring back? I'll bring back recommendations and I'll bring back some draft staff report language as to why it shows. Dilemmas. And then, is there anything else you all need to see it in order? Because what I'd like to do is schedule a little workshop so you can look at the changes I made. We can discuss them and then have a public hearing on it and adopt it.
Do we need to have a public hearing on fee schedule?
I think you should anytime you're making a recommendation to council, although it's not a land use decision, so. I think it's. I don't know if it's required, that usually.
It would seem to
planning
me that
commissions
we-
don't look at fee schedules.
I'm sorry?
Usually planning commissions don't look at fee schedules, it's council directed to, so, but you could just make a recommendation based on the staff report that I prepare.
Could we not have it the same night as one of the subdivisions?
Well, and this is something, so coming up next on our discussion, and maybe we should talk about that a little bit. So Cowlitz Meadows is out for SEPA review. We've conditioned them with a dozen or so SEPA mitigation measures, including a general condition that requires payment of the school, satisfying the school's impact fee, and bringing a letter from the school district saying those are satisfied prior to issuing the building permits. Prior to the 31st building permit being issued, that they have to pay the city a one-time mitigation cost for police equipment in the amount of about $40,000. I believe Chief was pleased about that. I saw him earlier and he was pretty happy that we were able to get that in. Because it does have a direct impact to him and his ability and the city's ability to
Sure.
finance new officers. Let's see what else. But the SEPA comment period is running. I believe I talked to the county planning director today. I had coordinated with them on streets, so we have all of their street standards conditioned in SEPA because they're county roads and not city roads, so we can't necessarily require them as part of our land use because they're outside of our jurisdiction. But we coordinated with the county ahead of time so that we could speed this through the process and we wouldn't have to delay it, having a bunch of back and forth during the SEPA review. So we've conditioned them to build city streets in the county that the county will then maintain until such time as the city annexes both sides of those. So that's the way it appears in the SEPA, but they're being built to city standards, so that way they'll be consistent with all the other city streets that get built up in that area as the city continues to annex. And we've done that, and I believe that'll be a precedent for how everything else develops as you annex and develop. I think it will apply the same standards to those, we'll just apply the city street standards. Perfect. So, but because all that's happening, they're ready, they will be ready by next month. I think the SEPA comment period closes in another 2 weeks. So, I'll have plenty of time to prepare a staff report and recommendation, and they will be ready for a public hearing at your next planning commission meeting next month.
I don't have a problem with that as long as I think we discussed it already, as long as we have a couple of weeks for the planning commission to review the submittal.
Would you like me, because I have their complete submittal with me now. I can release that in a link.
Yeah,
So I can release that in a link so you can have all their application materials, everything that I had. But you won't have the staff report until after the close of the comment period.
that's fine.
And then you gotta wait for me to get it done.
That's fine. Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, you can have all the documents that I have now if you're interested in combing through everything on your own. Certainly able to
On
do
Cowlitz
that as
Meadows,
a
for
yearly
sure,
body.
yes. Yeah.
Because I'm releasing that, you should not discuss it amongst yourselves outside of a public hearing. Any comments that you have, you shouldn't get together and say, hey, I looked at this, did you look at this, what do you think?
Mhm.
You can't do that outside of the public hearing process. And
Just make notes to bring back to the,
Make note to
meeting.
bring back, if you're doing your own review at home, that's fine, you can do that, you can gather your information from those plans and you can bring those back. If you have questions, you can always email staff. Because I'm not part of the decision-making tree, and as long as you don't copy each other when you're doing that. We should be okay. So if you're looking at this and you're saying, I don't understand what this is, or this looks like it's horribly wrong. Then you can either me or Mike Johnson address those where staff you as well.
Okay.
But you just can't include each other in the
Right.
emails, because you don't want to have a public hearing outside of
Right.
the process.
Right.
And then I'll prepare a staff report as soon as I can after the comment period closes. But I'll put those in a OneDrive. All of you access that. OneDrive is separate for it, okay.
Yeah.
I know some people don't use OneDrive and they have to use Google Drive or something else. I actually have the other ones, but the OneDrive is the one where I have everything stored.
All of your links open in browsers anyway.
Yeah,
So
so should we,
So I will share a OneDrive folder with the applicant's submittal on that. I can do that probably.
so shall we set a hearing date for the May the 17th?
That's what I would like you to do. I don't know if you need to do that by motion or just general head nod, but there should be something formal that sets that hearing date.
Well, let's go ahead and motion it.
yeah, I'll make a motion that we set the general hearing date for May 17th.
I will second that motion.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Uh,
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the annexation.
Annexation. So, as a follow-up to our last meeting, I have been trying to get copies of what we're presenting to the planning commission, so I could share that out with you in a OneDrive folder as I promised. I do have Valerie's presentation that she shared with the different options for subdivisions. I've got all their maps that they've submitted, but I still cannot get the information from Toledo Tel. Surprisingly, they've just gone quiet, and I've even asked both Windsor and Valerie and Hayward and Associates to please see if they can get anything from Toledo Tel. I mean, it was here in the record, we should have kept a copy of the paper when they.
I kept
submitted
I kept the plans.
You kept their plans?
I did.
So maybe you could,
Would you like them?
yeah, maybe you could give those back to me. And
Yes.
then I can, be our official copy.
Okay,
But we've been working with them to try to get them to provide an official copy, and they just don't reply. They've gone dark. So I don't know why maybe that he's been on vacation for a while. I have no idea. Maybe he's busy with other things. But if you can supply me with your copy,
not a
then
problem.
I'll just scan those in and I'll put those in the folder, and that solves the issue of not having a complete record for that meeting. But they too, council last night, Monday night, agreed to set the hearing date for the 60% petition for their next council meeting, which I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to hit because of noticing requirements. I had suggested that to them, and then I went back and double checked. I don't think I have to do a special notice. It's a regularly scheduled council meeting, so I think we can just send it out with the council agenda, but I gotta double check for annexations to make sure there's no weird rules. There are some that require 2-week notice periods for.
What day was that, Cindy?
Well, it's May 1st, but Todd, I went back and looked at a few past public hearing announcements. And there was about a 2-week gap between when the announcement went out and when the hearing actually happened.
Are those for annexations or other land use?
Well, just general public hearings like the budget and.
Oh, okay, so those are always 2 weeks.
Suspicious that it might be a 2-week process, which puts it outside of May 1st.
So it'll probably be May 17th that before they can hear the 60% petition. After that, I've got a
We can't both meet the same day.
May 5th, 2 weeks after that is the 19th.
And something like that. But it's a Monday, so.
It's the Monday after,
Third Monday.
it's the Monday after your next. So at your next planning commission meeting, you'll do the Cowles Meadows hearing.
Right.
Which just decided, and then the May 1st. For the annexation.
It'll be May 15th.
Get my calendar, so make a mistake.
Yeah, 15th is the third Monday.
Yeah, the first is Monday, the 15th is Monday. I can't, So the 15th is the Monday. So that means that your planning commission meeting is on the 17th.
Right.
And that's what we just set the date for the Callis Meadows hearing.
Right.
And that, so that 60%, once I get the 60%, and we could talk a little bit about that too, the annexation map. There are two gaps in it, and I thought I understood on Monday which gap the county was after. I thought it was the one up on Toledo Bader Road. There's about a 7,000 square foot lot with a rental home on it, up on Toledo Bader that's not included in the annexation. And I thought that's the one that the county planning director was talking to me about. But then, after a conversation today, it seems like there's another piece that, that I thought was in, but it's actually on Pomona Road where it does its loopy.
That's where I thought it was. I thought it came
There's a
down
little
from
square.
Toledo Vader and it comes down here and there's a little. Lot.
Square that's surrounded on both sides by city, which would make more sense for the county to be concerned about than the one that I thought that Lee was talking about. So I need to figure out which one, but there is one of two parcels, or maybe both, that what we're trying to do. So the next step in the process after council adopted 60% is then I'll send out notice to all the taxing districts and I'll file a notice of intent to annex with the boundary review board. After I file that notice of intent to annex with the boundary review board, then they have 45 days to choose whether or not they will invoke jurisdiction or not. If they don't invoke jurisdiction, or if they're silent in those 45 days, it's presumed that they're not going to. So that allows us then to move forward with the annexation. So the other thing that needs to happen, in our last meeting, the applicant had suggested about changing some of the zoning in the annexation area. One of the proposals that Valerie had brought forward, suggested some of it should change the commercial, broaden that commercial area out. I met today with the Sorensen family and they weren't aware of that request, that they seem to be largely in favor of commercial generally, so I don't know as they'd be opposed to it either. But if they're changing any of the pre-designated zoning, then they have to go through SEPA, which is a 28-day process. Plus, it takes about a week or two to get the publications lined up for the newspaper and everything, so that it all matches up. So it ends up being about a 4 to 5 to 6 week process to get through SEPA, which suspiciously is about the same as the 45 days that we have for boundary review board. The applicant has confirmed that they do want to change the zoning and they've submitted a SEPA checklist. So I think what I'll do is I'll prepare the SEPA checklist so everything will be ready to go.
Which applicant wants to change zoning?
The annexation applicants want to change.
No, which one?
Is Joma.
Joma wants-
represents the Joma property,
From residential to what?
commercial.
They had a section of commercial in their proposal.
Right, they were talking about a
Yeah.
storage area, possible, little
bodega or
cafe of some kind. So they want those to be zoned commercial or the whole place?
So they wanted to zone them commercial, just pieces of it, but then they also want to come in after they're annexed and negotiate a development agreement.
Makes sense.
It does make sense. We're kind of hoping for pre-annexation development agreements, but. Well, if we gotta go through SEPA, then we can kind of condition them on a few things. Through the SEPA process, and they seem to be electing to do that, which I can do during the same time period while we're waiting for the boundary review board. If the boundary review board does invoke jurisdiction, then it's pretty much out for us being able to get this annexed by August 1st, which was our goal, so that we could get it into the tax revenue for next year. If you have something annexed by August 1st, then you can start collecting taxes on January 1st. If it's later than that, then you have to wait the whole year. So we wouldn't get to collect taxes on it until 25 in the city. But I mean, it'll be a little bump in the city. It's bringing in farmland that's annexed isn't going to be a huge cash cow for the city anyway. The development's going to get built and constructed over the next year, which will add a significant amount of value to it. As that's annexed, the development for this. Is that subject to that same August 1st deadline, you know?
We'd have to talk to the Department of Revenue. There is a lag.
So if I miss out on that, yeah,
Talk about that.
yeah, but so basically what I'm looking at for you all is probably. What I was hoping for is that in your June planning commission meeting, you could hold a public hearing on the annexation. But we can wait until next month to set that, and I can update you all on the progress and status of where the annexation is. The direction from the county was that if you can fix whatever this gap is, whether it's the Raymond parcel or this other L parcel. Either one of those, if I can fix that gap, then it's less likely that the boundary review board will go jurisdiction. I'm basically speaking with the county planning staff who aren't the boundary review board. They work closely with the boundary review board to get their candidates. So that's kind of their advice. The other thing that they had asked me to do, get the road was clearly described as part of the annexation in the legal description. State law says that when you annex on both sides of a roadway, you're annexing the roadway. So for those pieces that you are already in city limits or where you're annexing on both sides within the annexation area, those are naturally part of the annexation. The county had asked that we just be clear about it and include.
That would be from Palomondon down Toledo Vader to the city limit, right?
That's correct. Well, so that part's already within the city, but still thought it was a county road.
It's a county road.
Yeah, because that is true
It's only city limits on one side.
only on one side. So you're gonna have gaps in there where it's city, county.
We are.
But the legal description will include those now, and I didn't see any harm in including them in the legal description. The applicant's doing the work. So, you know, it's a burden on them to get the legal descriptions updated, and they'll do that, and then we'll include them in it. Once I've corrected those two things, it's less likely the county will invoke jurisdiction, more likely to be faster.
I think if you don't,
Explain that term to me, to vote jurisdiction. You tell me what that means.
Yeah, they get to decide whether they want to hear it or not. So they have jurisdiction to review annexations, but only in limited cases. They can't just review it because they want to. They have to review it because one of the taxing districts asks them to, because one of the residents with standing asks them to, because there's an irregular boundary, or because it's non-compliant with GMA planning policies. So those are the basic, I mean, it's more specific than that. There's dozens of reasons why, but those are the basic category. So if they have one of those, then then when you submit your notice of intent to annex, they can say, we're not going to invoke jurisdiction, and then they're done. And then we can continue on with our process. We'll still have our CBER period to wait for it. So you can't hold public hearings or make decisions on it until after CBER anyway, but they can shorten their 45 days. But if they don't say anything in 45 days, then the state law says that they don't get a chance to invoke after they've been notified, and it's 45 days have lapsed. So by invoking jurisdiction, they're saying, we believe we have jurisdiction over how we want to review it. And then that goes to them, and they meet quarterly at the county. So you can see with that sort of a timeline that it's not gonna make it through. I mean, because they wouldn't even meet on it until next August.
okay, now you've asked us to have a public hearing on the annexation.
Alex Meadows.
And that's on the 17th of May.
We've already made a motion and decided on that.
And you had mentioned us doing something in June.
I think you just mixed them up though.
Unless
we're
I
having
gave you
two.
options on pallets, whether you wanted to do it in May or June, because you
Oh,
haven't
okay.
finished up with these fees.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the fact that, I don't know if you want to do all, that's gonna be a very long night if we do the subdivision hearing and then try to wade back into the fees.
I would prefer to put it off to June 21st and get the fee thing scheduled, but
Get the fee thing finished before you hear the subdivision.
yeah. Unless you think that's gonna be a problem for them.
It will be for the developer, they're anxious to get moving, and Mike Johnson can approve. So what you're bucking up against there is the construction season, and they want to get in the ground in as early as they can
Of course they do.
when the rain stops. And I think it's kinder and gentler of a city to try to accommodate those things, because they're natural things that a developer can't control. So it is a very It's not necessarily pro-development, it's just a way to recognize that they have constraints that are outside of their control, so you're trying to accommodate the schedules that they work in.
So if we had a public hearing on May the 17th and then made a recommendation, city council would get to it when,
They would get to it probably at their next council meeting,
which wouldn't be in.
because they're not doing, all they're doing, they don't get to do another open record public hearing. You're doing that here. So they take your recommendation and then they,
But that wouldn't happen until their June,
they're
first
first,
June meeting.
they're meeting after yours, that could happen, because they're not
Yeah.
doing an open record public hearing, so that is just an agenda.
So I think it probably behooves us to go ahead and stay with May 17th.
That gets the developer in the ground, because if you've got a June council approval on the preliminary plat, then it's pretty easy to be in Mike to give a construction plan approval by July 1st, which is generally about the beginning of the dry season.
Now, did you want to come back and try to tackle some of the fee schedule stuff that same night after the public hearing?
If you like, that's up to you, Joe.
Well, I'm not sure how long the public hearing on Cowles Meadows is gonna take. I assume the developer's representatives will be here.
The developer and their representatives will be here. Members of the public are invited to also.
They're always invited, Todd.
Yeah.
How many do you see here?
Mr. Knox will be here.
You may get a few people turn out with some questions. You may not.
Gorgeous.
So, but, staff will be here, so I'll be here, Mike Johnson will be here, we'll be able to answer questions, we'll both have work to prepare a staff report before your hearing, so you'll know generally what we're gonna say.
Yes, Councilman.
I think city council would be willing to hold special city council meetings to after your 17th to get back to the applicant quicker.
Your schedule's not the issue, you meet 2 weeks after they do, so that gives us just time to prepare.
Oh, it's good, I'm just paraphrasing.
So, yeah, so that's, and that works, because that'll put it at the beginning of June, which lines them up for construction plan approval in July. The issue we're having here is the fee schedule, and then how do we finish up on that? Because the thing that you have in your June meeting is likely, the annexation, either, yeah, if you've got your May 17th meeting, then your June meeting will be the annexation.
Y'all like meet again too.
So you could schedule a special meeting, and that's another choice, because the annexation will likely be ready pretty much the same time as Cowles Meadows is ready for hearing. The
Yeah,
annexation-
what I'm concerned about is, if I was looking, if we were having a meeting on annexation in June, then I'd like to see in May where we are with the boundary situation and the rest of that be at submittal to the county.
So wait until May to set up a special meeting, and the problem with the annexation is they're gonna have at least 2 weeks' notice. To get a public hearing out on that.
Well, if we're meeting May the 17th, we don't have another meeting until a month later. Unless we set up a special meeting.
But in June, you'll have the annexation, so when do you wanna do the rest of the schedule? Do you wanna do it the same night as Cowles Meadows? Do you wanna do it the same night as the annexation, or do you wanna set up a special meeting for the annexation and tackle the rest of the fee schedule for June?
How are you with a special meeting?
Huh?
How are you with a special meeting?
As long as it's not Thursday, I'm fine with it.
So
No Thursday.
in May, I'll know where the boundary review board, because if council's gonna hear this. Go back to the calendar here, so council will now hear this May 15th. Because I missed my notice date for first.
And I'm just being anecdotal about what I'm sure.
So the May 15th is the council's public hearing on the annexation.
By June, I still wouldn't know if the DRB had invoked jurisdiction or not, so that's only about 30 days after. Your planning commission meeting is only about 33 days after that, so I wouldn't know conclusively. I may know.
They don't call you and say we decided not to.
They may. Oh, they send us a letter saying we decided not to. It's formal. They have to respond, and if they respond saying there's nothing here. I think that they have to give the taxing district some time, so I don't think they can do that right away. I think there's I notify the taxing districts and I have to give them 30 days before we can act on it. And then I notify the boundary review board at the same time, and they get 45 days. So I think I have to at least let that 30 days lapse But by your June meeting, the 30 days from taxing districts would have lapsed, just not your BRB. And then the SEPA would also have lapsed, so all of that lines up. So if the county decided not to vote jurisdiction, you could hear that, and if they send us early notice saying, we're not gonna vote jurisdiction on this.
My question is the council on the 15th of May is having a public hearing, right?
The council is having a public hearing on the 60% petition
On the
on May
15th.
15th.
What hearing would we be having after the fact?
Well, and this is, it's. Planning commissions don't often consider annexations. I mean, that's a council action. So it may be that you don't need to have a public hearing on it because you're making a recommendation to council and they're gonna have the public hearing on it. So the public noticing requirements wouldn't apply, but you still have to consider it and you still have to. I'll prepare a staff report, which you can accept as your recommendation to council. But you still have to, we have to finish this thing up at planning commission. You all have to make a recommendation to council. And you have to do that after it's actionable. You can't make a recommendation to council.
After the public hearing?
Yeah, after the SEPA comment period closes, after the taxing districts have an
Okay.
opportunity to comment. And after the BRB either chooses to not invoke jurisdiction or naturally expires.
And you think we might be able to get that by the 21st, or do you think that would?
By your June 21st meeting, that's over 30 days. So I'll be on top of it to get all those notices out the day after council takes action on the 60%.
Okay,
Because I'm trying to expedite and I cost us a couple of weeks by not notifying the public that there was a hearing before the council made a decision.
okay, so June 21st, we should expect to go ahead and have another hearing
Yes.
in theory.
In theory, you'll have another public meeting or public hearing on the annexation at 60%. Or the next one would be in July.
Right.
So I would suggest that that maybe what we do in May is consider having a special meeting for the annexation. That more closely aligns. So in May, you can set a special meeting for the end of June. So that way it would basically regain the 2 weeks. So you could meet 2 weeks earlier and then the 45 days would be closed for the BRB.
But that would be a commission meeting only, it wouldn't be a public hearing.
Commission meeting only.
It'd still be open to the public, but I mean,
It's an open record public meeting, but it's not.
okay,
Because you don't need to have a hearing on it, council's gonna have the hearing on it, and then council could finally accept the annexation in early July. At their first meeting in July, that's the act that.
that would give us the opportunity, if we had a special meeting, to make a recommendation to them to accept.
Right,
And then they could act on it that first council meeting.
in July,
Right,
which would line up with the timing for taxing.
okay,
So that's the way the magic works. If the county BRB decides they do want to hear it. Then all that magic goes away and then you have to wait for your reporting.
I got all that. So it's good.
So we have a hearing date set for Alice Meadow. The question I have for you all is, do you want me to bring back? The fee discussion for the same night as the Alice Meadows hearing? Or do you want to wait?
I don't really have an issue with it, because I think we're pretty satisfied with where you are, I mean.
I am.
Adopting Kalama's fee schedule, from what I've seen. Other than the things that need to be inputted that we don't have on here.
You're gonna be exhausted after, because you would probably do that after the hearing for the subdivision.
Yeah,
To allow them and their consultant team to get in and get out. So that could take a couple hours, so depending on your question.
I don't see that happening, but.
Do they have the ability to table it, or does it have to be noticed for the piece of? Yeah, they have a 2-hour.
No, it's gonna,
Meadows, they say,
yeah,
we want to table this until the next meeting.
yeah, if you're gonna have a public, because I think you do have to have, like I said, it's unusual for you to make a recommendation on fee schedules, but I think it has to be at a public hearing. So, but we could notice it, what Adam is suggesting is notice it as a public hearing. And then if you get to the close of it and you're tired and you wanna go home, you could table the fee schedule until the next meeting. You could
Why don't we
open the
do that?
record, table it, and then say goodnight, everybody, and then we could come back.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that works. I'll eat a big breakfast.
That's true. Good suggestion.
Yeah, continue that public hearing and you don't even notice it again.
Right.
There you go. Let's save.
So that's what we'll do then. We'll plan on bringing both of those items to your next meeting in June. It'll be a busy night. We'll bring the fee schedule back, hopefully in a completable format that you all can bless and send out to council.
And meanwhile, you will submit to everyone here the
I'll send you all the
document.
plans and what we have for review on that.
Can we not bless the fee schedule now that that we all agreed on, just adopting?
Well,
the
he's
plan?
coming back with examples on the placement stuff.
Sure, yeah,
On lot.
yeah, never mind.
So I think you need to have a public
Yeah,
hearing on that.
yeah.
Because you're making a decision to recommend it, people are sensitive about fees.
Oh, yeah,
The more public process, even if nobody from the public shows up, the fact that you held a
I
public
know.
hearing on it.
yeah, we've had plenty of those public meetings.
Yeah, so you'll have a public hearing on the fee schedule as well after that, and then. I'll just have report, so like, you can't have.
No.
All right, any public comment?
Mr. Notch? So,
Can I hear a
any
motion to
comments?
adjourn?
So move.
Get a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, gentlemen.